If XRP is surrounded by institutional interest, new infrastructure, stablecoin growth, and constant talk about adoption, then why does the price still feel stuck? That is the question a lot of XRP holders are asking right now. And honestly, it is a much more important question than another prediction about whether XRP can hit $5, $10, or $100. Because before we talk about where XRP could go, we need to understand what is actually holding it. Back today, look at the conversation happening around XRP right now. Some holders are frustrated because they have heard about adoption and utility for years, yet they keep looking at the chart and asking the same thing. When does all of this finally show up in the price? Others are becoming more skeptical. They are asking whether Ripple's partnerships and ecosystem growth automatically create demand for XRP itself. And that distinction is critical. Because Ripple can grow as a company, the XRP ledger can become more useful. Stablecoins like RLUSD can expand. Institutions can experiment with blockchain infrastructure. But none of those things automatically means that every new development creates direct buying pressure for XRP. That is where a lot of the confusion begins. One of the strongest concerns raised by the XRP community is incredibly simple. Ripple adoption does not necessarily equal XRP adoption. If a financial institution works with Ripple, that may be positive for Ripple. If an institution uses the XRP ledger, that can strengthen the ecosystem. But the question XRP holders really care about is more specific. Does that institution actually need XRP? And if it does, how much and how frequently? That is the missing connection investors keep looking for. And this is also why the current price action can feel so frustrating. You can have a long list of positive headlines, but if the market does not see a clear connection between those developments and actual XRP demand, the token can remain under pressure. Markets do not simply price a story because the story sounds impressive. Eventually, investors want to see the mechanism that connects the story to value. That does not automatically mean the XRP thesis is dead. It also does not prove that a massive price move is coming. It simply means we have to separate the Ripple story from the XRP value story. And there is another important signal from the community. Many viewers are tired of hearing endless optimism without getting a clear explanation of the price. They do not necessarily want more hype. They want someone to explain why XRP can have all this activity around it and still trade at a level that leaves long-term holders frustrated. That is exactly what we need to examine, because there are several potential forces working against XRP at the same time. Market sentiment matters, liquidity matters, investor positioning matters, competition matters. And perhaps most importantly, the market needs a convincing reason to translate ecosystem growth into sustained demand for the XRP token itself. So the real question is not simply, when will XRP explode? The better question is, what has to change before the market starts treating XRP differently? And once we understand that, the next question becomes even more interesting. Is XRP actually missing demand? Or is the market simply waiting for something that has not happened yet? And this is where the XRP story gets more complicated, because there is a difference between potential utility and realized demand. The market can believe that XRP has a role to play in the future, but investors still need evidence that this role is large enough to create meaningful and sustained demand for the token. That is why the debate around RLUSD is so important. Some XRP holders see the growth of Ripple's stablecoin ecosystem as another piece of a much larger financial infrastructure. But others are asking a very reasonable question. If more transactions are moving through a stablecoin, where exactly does XRP fit into that process? Does the growth of RLUSD automatically require more XRP? Not necessarily. The answer depends on how the assets are actually being used and whether XRP is serving a necessary role in liquidity, settlement, or bridging. This distinction is something the market appears to be watching closely. The same thing applies to institutional adoption. Hearing that banks, financial companies, or large institutions are exploring blockchain technology sounds bullish on the surface. But XRP investors should go one step further and ask, are they simply using blockchain infrastructure, or are they actually using XRP? Those are two very different things. And that may explain part of the disconnect between the headlines and the chart. Investors can see development happening around the XRP ecosystem while the market is still waiting for a stronger signal. That translates that development into direct token demand. There is also another factor we cannot ignore: expectations. XRP has one of the most passionate communities in crypto, and that community has been hearing enormous predictions for years: $5, $10, $50, even three-digit targets. When expectations become that extreme, a move to $1 or $2 can actually feel like failure to someone who is expecting something much bigger. That creates a strange situation where XRP can make progress and holders can still feel disappointed. And some of the comments we looked at show exactly that conflict. One group believes the market is simply early and that the infrastructure is being built before the major demand arrives. Another group believes the price is telling us something important and that all the positive narratives have already been priced in. Both sides are looking at the same asset, but they are asking different questions. The bullish investor asks, what happens if XRP becomes critical infrastructure? The skeptical investor asks, where's the evidence that XRP is becoming critical infrastructure right now? And that second question is the one we should not ignore. Because if XRP is eventually going to break out of this frustrating range, something has to change. It could be a major increase in actual network usage. It could be deeper institutional liquidity. It could be stronger demand for XRP as a bridge asset. It could be a broader change in crypto market conditions, or it could be several of these factors happening at the same time. But there is one thing we should not do. Assume that every partnership automatically means XRP price goes higher. The market eventually demands proof. And that brings us to the most important part of this entire discussion. What would actual XRP demand look like if it finally arrived? Because if we can identify that signal, we can stop guessing based on headlines and start watching for the evidence that could actually change the market's perception of XRP. So what would actually change the picture for XRP? It would not be another partnership headline by itself. The market would need to see a clearer connection between real-world financial activity and actual demand for XRP. If institutions begin using XRP directly for liquidity, settlement, or bridging at meaningful scale, that would be a much stronger signal than simply announcing another blockchain integration. That is the distinction XRP holders need to watch. Because right now, the debate is not really about whether Ripple is building. It clearly is. The bigger question is whether that growth eventually creates enough demand for the XRP token to change the market's valuation, and that is why I would be careful with both extremes. Saying XRP is guaranteed to explode ignores the evidence we still need to see. But saying XRP has no future simply because the price is stuck ignores the possibility that adoption and infrastructure can take time to translate into market demand. The next phase could ultimately come down to execution. If the ecosystem expands but XRP demand remains weak, the price may continue frustrating holders. But if real XRP utility begins scaling alongside institutional liquidity and network activity, the market may have to reconsider how it values the asset. So instead of asking, when is XRP going to the moon? Watch the evidence. Watch actual usage. Watch liquidity. Watch institutional participation. And most importantly, watch whether those developments require XRP itself. Because that is what could finally answer the question we started with. What's holding XRP back? And if you want more XRP analysis without the hype, subscribe to OG John, XRP Insights.